Right now, somewhere, two people your exact age are about to buy the same house on the same street for the same price, and one of them is going to pay $50,000 more for it than the other. Not because of the house, because of a three-digit number neither of them was ever taught to think about. That number has been quietly running in the background of your entire adult life, deciding what things cost you long before you ever noticed it existed. By the time you finish this video, you're going to understand exactly how that number works, why almost everyone ignores it until it's too late, and what the people who quietly become wealthy actually do differently. None of which involves a higher salary, a lucky stock pick, or anything you weren't capable of doing starting today. Wealth built quietly doesn't announce itself. There's no new watch, no upgraded car sitting in the driveway. It's just a number on a screen on an ordinary morning. That means you finally stop trading your time for permission to live. But before any of that becomes possible, almost everyone walks into adulthood carrying an invisible reputation score, never explained, never taught in any classroom. Nobody hands you the manual. You just find out the rules exist once you've already broken a few of them. Here's how that plays out in real life. Two people graduate around the same time, take entry-level jobs paying nearly the same salary, and move to the same city. Neither one is reckless. Neither one would describe themselves as bad with money. One of them simply pays everything the moment it arrives. The credit card, the phone bill, the utilities. Automatic, boring, on time every single month without exception. The other one means well, but lets a payment slide a few days here, a week there, always assuming it evens out eventually because the balance gets paid off in full anyway. 3 years pass. The first person's credit score has climbed into the high 700s. The second person's score has drifted down into the low 600s, and they have no idea why, because in their mind, they've never actually missed a payment in any way that mattered to them. A few years later, they both find themselves house hunting in the same neighborhood, and they end up buying nearly identical homes for the same purchase price. But because of that gap in their credit history, the second buyer's mortgage rate comes in almost 2 full percentage points higher than the first buyer's. It doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. It's just a slightly higher number on a piece of paper during closing. But stretched across a 30-year mortgage, that one difference quietly costs the second buyer tens of thousands of dollars more for the exact same house. Broken down monthly, it's roughly the cost of a streaming bundle and a few takeout orders, small enough to never notice, large enough to total more than a new car by the time the loan is paid off. That money didn't disappear. It moved, slowly and invisibly, from one person's life into a lender's balance sheet, one unnoticed payment at a time. Looking honestly at where your money actually goes tends to feel uncomfortable the first time you do it, almost like getting caught by your own spending habits. More than half of working adults in this country live paycheck to paycheck, and that figure includes a meaningful share of people earning well above average, $60,000, $70,000, even $80,000 a year, who still somehow reach the end of the month with nothing left over. The leaks are rarely dramatic. They're a gym membership nobody got around to canceling, a handful of subscriptions, each under $15, that nobody remembers signing up for, a few extra meals out during a busy week that never feel significant in the moment they happen. Take dining out specifically. The average household spends close to $4,000 a year on food outside the home, restaurants, delivery apps, coffee runs, completely separate from groceries. For a lot of people in their late 20s and early 30s, that single category quietly costs more over a year than their entire retirement contribution. Nobody decides in one sitting to spend $4,000 on takeout instead of investing it. It happens in $8 and $15 increments, dozens of times a month, each one too small to feel worth questioning. Tracking your spending for even 1 month doesn't change your habits by itself, but it does something more important. It takes hundreds of invisible, forgettable micro-decisions and compresses them into one number you can finally see. And once you can see it, you can finally choose differently. Now imagine you've tightened things up. You've found the leaks, you've built a real surplus, and you're doing what most financial advice tells you to do with it, keeping it safe in a regular savings account. Here's the uncomfortable part. That advice, followed exactly as given, quietly makes you poorer every single year. The interest most savings accounts pay sits well under 1%. The cost of living, meanwhile, climbs by a few percent every year without fail. The gap between those two numbers means the actual purchasing power of every dollar sitting in that safe account shrinks a little more each year, even while the number on the screen technically goes up. The bank takes your deposit, lends it out to someone else at a much higher rate, pays you a fraction of a percent for the privilege, and quietly pockets the difference. Picture two co-workers in their late 20s who each save the same lump sum. Call it $12,000. One of them leaves it completely untouched in a standard savings account for the next 30 years, doing exactly what feels safe and responsible. By the time they're ready to retire, that $12,000 has only grown to around $13,000 or $14,000 once you account for everything inflation has quietly eaten away. The other coworker takes that same $12,000 and puts it into a simple, low-cost fund that tracks the broader stock market, then leaves it completely alone. No panic selling during downturns, no trying to time anything. Despite every crash, correction, and terrifying news cycle along the way, the market has historically returned somewhere around 10% a year on average over long stretches of time. 3 decades of that kind of growth, compounding quietly in the background, turns the same $12,000 into well over $200,000. Same starting amount, same 30 years. One person's money sat still and lost ground. The other person's money kept working and multiplied itself more than 15 times over. Eventually, no matter how well you manage spending and saving, you hit a hard ceiling, because the real lever in all of this is your income. And waiting on a standard yearly raise to move, that number barely makes a dent. A typical 3% annual raise on a $55,000 salary works out to less than $1,700 before taxes, which after withholding lands somewhere under $100 extra a month, in a year when groceries, rent, and gas have all quietly gotten more expensive too. The math rarely works in your favor if a once-a-year review is your only plan for growing your income. The labor market itself has shifted underneath everyone in ways most people haven't fully noticed yet. More than a third of the workforce now earns income outside a single traditional employer in some form, and the gap between having a credential and having a demonstrated provable skill keeps shrinking every year. Picture someone who decides, quietly, to spend a few evenings a week learning one specific, narrow, useful skill, something businesses are actively willing to pay for, rather than something broad and generic. They start small. They practice on low-stakes projects. They undercharge badly on their very first paid job because they're still building proof of what they can do. They stay consistent through the awkward, unprofitable early months. Within a year and a half, that quiet evening habit has turned into a second income stream worth more per month than their last 3 annual raises combined, without ever quitting their day job, without taking on debt, without needing permission from anyone to start. Even a genuinely profitable skill eventually runs into its own ceiling, though if your income completely stops the moment you stop working. Get sick for a week, take a vacation, and the money stops with you. The real shift, the one that actually changes the trajectory of someone's financial life, comes from building something that keeps producing value even while you're doing something else entirely. Picture 2 equally skilled freelancers, both earning roughly the same income doing similar work. One keeps trading hours directly for dollars, year after year, project after project, reliable, but completely dependent on their continued effort. The other slowly turns part of their process into something repeatable, a documented system clients can follow, a short recorded course other people in their field are willing to pay for, a few retainer clients instead of one-off projects that have to be constantly replaced. 2 years later, the first freelancer is earning almost exactly what they always have. The second is earning considerably more while working noticeably fewer hours, because part of their effort finally started outliving the hour it was originally spent in. None of this works in isolation from debt, because debt itself isn't inherently good or bad. It depends entirely on what it's pointed at. The average household carries a meaningful credit card balance at an interest rate north of 20%, and paying only the minimum each month means quietly feeding a debt that barely shrinks, for things that were used up and forgotten about long ago. That's debt working against you, transferring your future income to someone else for no ongoing benefit. On the other hand, the exact same tool, borrowed money, used differently, to acquire something that produces income, like a small rental property, where the tenant's rent covers the loan payment and leaves a little extra every month, builds wealth instead of draining it. One version of debt finances things that disappear the moment you use them. The other version finances ownership of something that keeps paying you back. All of this eventually points toward one clear, calculable target, instead of a vague, comfortable-sounding goal, like wanting to retire someday. There's a well-known principle from retirement research, stress-tested against more than a century of market history, including the worst crashes on record, that says once your investments can sustainably cover roughly 4% of their total value every year, you no longer have to trade your hours for income ever again. The math behind it is simple. Take what you actually need to live on each year and multiply that number by 25. Need $40,000 a year to live comfortably. Your target is $1 million invested. Need $60,000 a year? $1.5 million. Need $80,000? $2 million. Invested and left to grow. The number itself is precise and easy to calculate. The path to it never is. It's full of market downturns that make the number temporarily shrink, months where the budget falls apart completely, and long stretches where absolutely nothing seems to be moving, no matter how consistent you've been. The people who eventually reach that number aren't the ones who somehow avoided every one of those setbacks. They're simply the ones who kept their contributions automated and running in the background through all of it, through the crashes, the slow years, the moments of real doubt, until one ordinary Tuesday morning, the math finally lines up. And on that morning, you realize the goal was never really about watching a balance grow as high as possible. It was always about permanently buying back your own mornings, and finally getting to choose, for the first time, exactly how you want to show up for the rest of your life. None of what's been described here requires a 6-figure salary to start, and that's the part most people get wrong before they even begin. It requires a sequence, paying attention to the invisible number first, finding the small leaks before chasing big wins, putting money where it can actually grow instead of quietly shrinking, building income that doesn't depend entirely on a once-a-year review, and eventually creating something that keeps paying you even when you're not actively working. Skip the order, and the later steps tend to collapse. Build a high income while ignoring the credit score underneath it, and you end up overpaying silently on every major purchase for decades. Chase investment returns while still leaking thousands a year to forgotten subscriptions, and the leaks quietly cancel out the gains. The order matters as much as the actions themselves. What makes this entire process so easy to ignore is that none of it feels urgent on any single day. Missing one streaming cancellation doesn't ruin a month. One unpaid evening instead of working on a skill doesn't cost you a visible amount of money. 1 year of leaving savings in a low-interest account doesn't feel like a crisis. Each individual decision is small enough to dismiss completely. And that's exactly why most people dismiss all of them, indefinitely, for years at a time. Wealth built quietly isn't built through a handful of dramatic decisions. It's built through thousands of unremarkable ones, repeated long enough that the math eventually does what math always does when given enough time. It compounds silently in a direction you chose a long time ago and mostly forgot you were choosing. There's no specific age where this becomes too late to start, and there's no income level low enough to make it pointless. The version of you checking a credit score for the first time, the version finding $4,000 a year in forgotten takeout orders, the version moving a small amount of savings into something that actually grows. None of those versions need to be impressive yet. They just need to be consistent for longer than feels reasonable, until an ordinary Tuesday morning arrives where the number on the screen finally says what thousands of small, boring decisions were quietly building toward the entire time.